Part 1. The Universal Innovation Bureau sat at the heart of galactic civilization, a massive station that floated between three ancient star systems. For 12,000 years, the Bureau had watched and measured and recorded every new invention, every scientific breakthrough, every leap forward in technology from any of the 4,000 spacefaring species went into their databases. The Bureau existed to understand progress. They wanted to know why some civilizations grew while others stayed still. They wanted to find the secrets of innovation itself. Senior analyst Ara had worked at the Bureau for 300 years. Her species, lived for a very long time and valued careful study above all else. Ara had gray-blue skin that shifted color slightly when she was thinking hard, and right now it had turned almost purple. She sat in her office, surrounded by floating screens of data, and she could not make sense of what she was seeing. The human file had landed on her desk 6 months ago. Humans were new to the galactic community. They had only achieved faster-than-light travel 4 centuries ago, which made them bobbies by galactic standards. Most species took thousands of years to mature. They had spent 8,000 years perfecting their shield technology. They had developed their communication networks over 5 of patient hive-mind cooperation. Progress, everyone understood, was slow and steady. But the human numbers were wrong. Ara pulled up the graphs again. Human innovation did not follow any pattern the Bureau had ever seen. Every other species showed the same basic shape. When times were good and resources were plenty, innovation went up. When societies worked together in peace, progress accelerated. Competition helped a little, but cooperation helped more. This was the universal truth that 12,000 years of data had proven. Humans did not follow this truth. Their innovation rates spiked at strange times, not during peace but during conflict, not during abundance but during scarcity. And most confusing of all, some of their greatest breakthroughs seemed connected to something the Bureau had never considered important. Personal grudges, wounded pride, the desire to prove someone else wrong. Ara had spent 3 months checking her data. She ran the numbers through different filters. She adjusted for cultural variables. She consulted with specialists in human psychology. The pattern remained the same. When a human felt insulted or dismissed or told they could not do something, their productivity increased dramatically. When they held a personal grudge against another individual, they worked harder and longer than any other species the Bureau had ever measured. It made no logical sense. Negative emotions should impair cognition. Anger and resentment wasted mental energy that could be used for problem-solving. Every psychological model in the Bureau's archives agreed on this point. Spite was primitive. Spite was inefficient. Spite should slow progress down. But the human data said otherwise. Ara decided she needed to bring this to the Council of Analysts. Perhaps she had made an error. Perhaps someone else would see what she had missed. The council met in the Bureau's central chamber, a vast room with seats arranged in a circle so that all species could see each other as equals. Ara took her place and waited for the other senior analysts to arrive. The delegate, a tall being made of flowing silver energy, drifted into position. The representative, and the size of a large dog with dozens of clicking limbs, settled onto her perch. Representatives from 8 other major species filled the remaining seats. Ara shared her findings. She showed them the graphs, the correlations, the historical cross-references. She pointed to specific examples. Human scientists who had made breakthrough discoveries after being publicly embarrassed. Human engineers who had solved impossible problems after being told the problems were impossible. Human inventors who had created new technologies for no reason other than to prove a rival wrong. The delegate, whose name was Harmonious Understanding of Stars, spoke first. His voice rang like soft bells. He found the data interesting but surely incorrect. His own species had achieved interstellar travel through peaceful meditation and collective purpose. They had no concept of spite. They did not understand why any being would waste energy on such feelings. Perhaps, he suggested gently, Ara had misunderstood human psychology. The representative, who was called the voice of 7 million wings, clicked her agreement. Her hive mind species had solved faster-than-light communication through perfect cooperation. Every worked as one, their thoughts flowing together without conflict or ego. The idea that negative emotions could drive innovation seemed backwards to her. Surely the humans were simply a young species that had not yet learned better. They would grow out of this spite phase as they matured. Other delegates offered similar opinions. The general consensus was that Aura's data must be flawed somehow. No species could truly innovate through such primitive emotional drives. The council thanked her for her work but suggested she continue refining her methodology. Aura returned to her office feeling frustrated. She knew her methodology was sound. She had checked it dozens of times. But she also knew the council would not accept her conclusions without more evidence. She submitted a proposal for a field study. The Bureau would send observers to human space. These observers would embed themselves with human research teams, corporations, and academic institutions. They would document human innovation directly, watching it happen in real time. Only then could the council see what Aura had seen in the data. The proposal sat in review for 2 months. Finally, the council approved it. They expected, Aura could tell, that the field study would prove her wrong. They thought the observers would return with evidence that humans were just like everyone else, that spite played no real role in their progress. The study would debunk the anomaly and everything could go back to normal. 3 observers were selected for the mission. Was a young analyst, eager to prove himself through field work. Came from the vessel species, beings of pure thought who existed in mechanical bodies and who were known for their perfectly neutral observations. Mox was a stout four-armed species with natural empathic abilities that would help him understand human emotions. The 3 observers departed for human space. Their mission would last 1 standard galactic year. They would watch and record and send regular reports back to the Bureau. Aura wished them well and settled in to wait. The first reports came in after 3 months. They were preliminary, cautious, full of qualifications and caveats. The observers were still learning to navigate human society. They found humans confusing, contradictory, and strangely intense about things that seemed unimportant. But they also found them welcoming and curious about galactic civilization. The second set of reports came at 6 months. The tone had changed. The observers had started to see patterns. They were finding evidence that supported Aura's data. They requested permission to extend their observations. The final reports arrived at the end of the year. Aura read them alone in her office, her skin shifting from purple to deep blue as the implications became clear. The observers had found exactly what she had predicted. Human spite was real, human spite was powerful, and human spite was driving innovation at a rate that the galaxy had never seen before. Aura called an emergency meeting of the council. She had new data now, data that could not be dismissed or explained away. The galaxy needed to understand what humans really were, because if her calculations were correct, and she was certain they were, then humans were not just an anomaly. They were a threat. Part 2. The Council of Analysts gathered for the emergency session. Aura had not called such a meeting in her 300 years of service. The other delegates arrived with expressions of concern and curiosity. They took their seats and waited for her to speak. Aura began with Observer's report. Had embedded himself with a human technology corporation called Nexus Dynamics. He had chosen this company because it was considered average for human standards. Not the biggest, not the smallest, not the most innovative, not the least. Just a regular company full of regular humans doing regular work. What found there had shaken him deeply. There was an engineer named Sarah. She was 34 years old, competent at her job and generally well-liked by her. She had been working at Nexus Dynamics for 6 years. In her first 5 years, her innovation output matched Bureau predictions exactly. She produced good work at a steady pace, neither exceptional nor disappointing. Then something changed. Sarah presented a new design proposal to her supervisor, a man named David. The design was ambitious. It proposed a new power coupling system that would be more efficient than anything currently on the market. David reviewed the proposal in a meeting with Sarah and several other team members present. He called it amateur work. He said it showed a fundamental misunderstanding of basic engineering principles. He listed 17 flaws in front of her colleagues and suggested that Sarah might want to consider whether engineering was really the right field for her. He smiled while he said it. Had recorded the meeting. He played the audio for the council. They heard David's condescending voice, his gentle mockery, the small laughs from who were too afraid to defend Sarah. They heard Sarah say nothing in response. What happened next? All bureau models. Sarah went home that night and did not sleep. She worked. She pulled up her proposal and went through David's 17 criticisms one by one. She found that 3 of them were valid. The other 14 were wrong. David had not actually understood her design. He had simply assumed it was flawed because it came from someone he did not respect. Sarah fixed the 3 real problems. Then she kept working. She improved the design further than her original proposal had intended. She ran simulations. She built small prototypes in her garage. She did this every night for 6 months, sleeping only 4 or 5 hours, surviving on coffee and something she called pure fury. Documented her productivity during this period. It was 400% higher than her baseline. 400%. No species in Bureau records had ever shown such a spike from any motivation. At the end of 6 months, Sarah presented her refined design to the company's board of directors. She went over David's head. She showed them a working prototype that outperformed everything in their current product line by a factor of 3. The board was impressed. They funded full development immediately. David was reassigned to a different division. Sarah was promoted. But she did not stop there. She left the company a year later and started her own firm. She hired engineers who had been dismissed or overlooked. She built a corporate culture around proving doubters wrong. Within 3 years, her company had become the dominant force in power coupling technology. Nexus Dynamics, her former employer, filed for bankruptcy 5 years after that. Sarah had destroyed an entire corporation because one man had embarrassed her in a meeting. This report noted that when he interviewed Sarah about her motivations, she had smiled and said 4 words: "David can get fucked." The council sat in silence after hearing this. Ara moved on to Observer's report. Had embedded herself in human academia, specifically in the physics department of a major research university. She wanted to understand how humans advanced pure science, the kind of knowledge that was not driven by profit or practical application. What she found was 2 physicists named Dr. James Wright and Dr. Maria Santos. James and Maria had been graduate students together 20 years earlier. They had been friends briefly, before a dispute over credit on a joint paper had destroyed their relationship. Each believed the other had stolen their ideas. Each believed they deserved the recognition the other had received. For 20 years they had worked in the same field. Their research constantly overlapped. Every paper one published, the other would review harshly. Every grant one received, the other would criticize publicly. They attended the same conferences and refused to speak to each other. Their colleagues found the feud exhausting and childish. But noticed something strange. The feud was accelerating their work. Every time James published a breakthrough, Maria would work obsessively to surpass it. Every time Maria received recognition, James would push himself harder to reclaim the spotlight. Neither could rest while the other was ahead. Neither could accept being second best. Their graduate students and postdoctoral researchers were swept up in the rivalry. Teams formed around each professor. Late nights became normal. Coffee consumption reached dangerous levels. The physics department's output increased by 200% compared to departments without such rivalries. Then the breakthrough came. Both James and Maria were working on quantum computing. They were approaching the same problem from different angles, racing to publish first. Bureau projections suggested this problem would take another 30 years to solve through normal collaborative methods. James and Maria solved it in 3 years. Not together. They never collaborated. They never shared data or insights, but they drove each other forward with such intensity that they both converged on the solution within weeks of each other. They published their papers simultaneously, each claiming independent discovery. The scientific community credited both of them. James and Maria were both nominated for major awards, but when interviewed them separately, neither felt satisfied. Each believed they should have been the sole discoverer. Each was already planning their next project, their next chance to finally and definitively prove themselves superior. This report concluded that human hatred, properly directed, could accomplish what cooperation could not. The delegate made a sound of deep distress when she heard this. Ara moved on to the final report, Observer Mox's findings. Mox was an empath. He could feel human emotions directly. This gave him insights that and could not access. He had chosen to study human inventors, the people who created entirely new technologies that had never existed before. He found a woman named Tors. Was a propulsion engineer who worked independently, funding her research through consulting contracts and small grants. She was brilliant, everyone agreed, but difficult. She had no patience for bureaucracy, no tolerance for people she considered stupid, and an unfortunate habit of saying exactly what she thought. At a professional conference, had presented a theoretical framework for a new type of engine. It would use principles that were considered speculative by mainstream physics. A senior physicist in the audience had stood up during the question period and called her work mathematically elegant but physically impossible. He had explained, in a patient and condescending voice, exactly why her ideas could never work in reality. Mox had been in the audience. He had felt emotions shift in real time. There was shame at first, the hot flush of public humiliation, then anger, bright and sharp, then something else, something Mox had never felt from any other species. It was a cold, focused determination. It was spite crystallized into purpose. It was the absolute certainty that she would prove this man wrong if it took her the rest of her life. Mox followed for the next 2 years. He watched her work 18-hour days. He felt her emotions stay locked in that same cold fury, never wavering, never softening. She did not care about scientific advancement. She did not care about helping humanity. She did not even particularly care about the engine itself. She cared about one thing, making that physicist eat his words. At the end of 2 years, she had a working prototype. It should not have been possible. Bureau physics models said it was impossible, but had found a way. She had pushed so hard, driven by such pure spite, that she had broken through barriers that should have stopped her. When she published her results, the senior physicist who had mocked her was forced to publicly acknowledge his error. According to Mox's empathic reading, felt something close to joy for the first time in 2 years. Then she immediately started her next project, because someone at a faculty dinner had suggested she had just gotten lucky. Mox's report contained a warning. Human spite, he wrote, was not like anger in other species. It did not burn hot and fade quickly. It burned cold and lasted forever. Humans remembered insults for decades. They passed grudges down through generations. And every insult, every dismissal, every moment of disrespect became fuel for achievement. The council sat in stunned silence when Ara finished presenting the reports. The delegate's silver form had gone dim with concern. The representative had stopped clicking entirely. Ara spoke into the silence. She said what everyone was thinking. Humans were 400 years into their spacefaring existence. They were bobbies, and already They were innovating faster than species that had been traveling the stars for. What would happen when they had been in space for 1,000 years? For 10,000? What would happen when they turned that spite outward, toward species who had dismissed them as primitive and young and emotionally unstable? The Council had some difficult calculations to make. Part 3. The Bureau's classified report took 3 months to prepare. Every word was debated. Every recommendation was argued over. But in the end, the Council of Analysts reached consensus. The report was transmitted to the highest levels of galactic governance, marked with security codes that had not been used in 6,000 years. The report was simple in its conclusions. Humans were different. Humans were dangerous, not because they were aggressive, though they could be, not because they were warlike, though their history contained many conflicts. Humans were dangerous because they converted negative emotions into productivity at a rate no other species could match. Every condescension was fuel. Every dismissal was motivation. Every time an elder species looked down on humanity, humanity worked harder to prove them wrong. The Bureau ran projections based on the observer data. If human innovation continued at current rates, they would match technological levels within 2 centuries. They would surpass the within 3. They would become the dominant technological force in the galaxy within 500 years. But those projections assumed that humans remained unmotivated. Those projections assumed that the elder species treated humanity with respect. If the elder species insulted humans, the projections changed dramatically. Widespread galactic condescension could accelerate human progress by a factor of 10. Active mockery could push it even higher. The Bureau's models suggested that a coordinated campaign of disrespect toward humanity could accidentally create a technological superpower within a single century. The Galactic Council received the report with alarm. Emergency sessions were called. Representatives from all major species debated what to do. The proposed a policy of respectful engagement. They would treat humans as equals, speak to them with dignity, and avoid any behavior that might trigger their spite response. This would keep human innovation at manageable levels while giving the elder species time to prepare. The disagreed. They thought humanity should be isolated, cut them off from galactic civilization, deny them access to advanced technology, let them develop on their own slowly without the insults that drove them forward. Other species had other ideas. Some wanted to befriend humanity so completely that they would have no enemies to spite. Others suggested subtle manipulation, creating internal conflicts that would direct human spite inward instead of outward. The debates lasted for months. Specialists in psychology, sociology, and xenobiology offered testimony. Historical records were reviewed. Models were run and rerun. In the end, the Council chose the approach. They passed a resolution that would become known as the Human Motivation Prevention Act. The act required all species to treat humans with diplomatic respect. No condescension, no dismissiveness, no suggestions that humans were young or primitive or emotionally unstable. Violations would be punished with trade sanctions and diplomatic consequences. Special training programs were established. Diplomats, merchants, scientists, and anyone else who might interact with humans were taught to be careful with their words. They learned to avoid phrases that humans might interpret as insults. They practiced keeping their faces neutral when humans said something that seemed ridiculous or naive. The training was hard. Many elder species had spent developing a sense of their own superiority. They had earned their advanced technology through patience and cooperation and wisdom. The idea that they had to be careful around a species that had been spacefaring for only 4 centuries felt wrong to many of them. But the data was clear. The projections were terrifying, and so they learned to hold their tongues. For a time, it seemed to work. Human innovation rates stabilized at levels that, while still impressive, were not alarming. Diplomatic relations between humanity and the elder species remained cordial. The galaxy relaxed. Then the leak happened. No one knew who was responsible. Perhaps a disgruntled clerk in the bureau. Perhaps a spy from one of the species who opposed the Human Motivation Prevention Act. Perhaps it was just an accident, a file attached to the wrong message, a security protocol that failed. However it happened, the result was the same. The Bureau's original research reports ended up in human hands. The reports that called them anomalous, the reports that called them primitive, the reports that called them emotionally compromised, the reports that analyzed their spite with clinical detachment, treating them like interesting specimens rather than people. The reports that contained thousands of small dismissals and subtle condescensions, all the ways the elder species had looked down on humanity while pretending to treat them as equals. The humans read everything. Ara learned about the leak 3 days after it happened. She was in her office when the news came through. She sat very still for a long time, her skin shifting through shades of blue and purple, and finally settling on something close to black. She called up the Bureau's monitoring systems. She wanted to see how humans were reacting. Across human space, in laboratories and research centers and university departments, innovation rates were spiking. Not by 400% like Sarah, not by 200% like the physics department. The rates were climbing past anything the Bureau had ever recorded. Ara watched the numbers rise. She watched human scientists abandon their current projects to start new ones. She watched engineers quit stable jobs to pursue ideas they had been told were impossible. She watched a generation of researchers look at the galactic community and decide, collectively and individually, that they had something to prove. The Galactic Council held emergency sessions. They demanded to know what could be done. They searched for ways to contain the damage. There was nothing to be done. The spite was already burning. Every human who read those reports, every human who learned that the galaxy had been secretly looking down on them, became more motivated than they had ever been before. Messages began arriving at the Bureau. Human scientists wanted to share their progress. They were making breakthroughs in fields that the elder species had considered settled. They were finding new solutions to problems that had been solved ago. They were improving on everything, not because they needed to, but because they wanted to prove they could. One message came from Tors, the propulsion engineer who had built her impossible engine out of pure spite. She had read the Bureau's assessment of her work. She had seen the footnote that called her success a statistical anomaly unlikely to be replicated. Her message was brief. She had assembled a team of other statistical anomalies. They were working on something new. She did not say what it was, only that the Bureau would find out soon enough. Ara added a final note to her personal files. She wrote that she had been wrong about one thing. She had thought human spite was dangerous because it made them innovative. She had not understood the full picture. Human spite was dangerous because it was contagious. When humans felt disrespected as individuals, they worked harder as individuals. But when humans felt that their entire species had been disrespected, they worked harder together. Their spite aligned. Their spite focused. 8 billion minds burning with the same cold determination to prove the galaxy wrong. The delegate visited Ara in her office. His silver form flickered with distress. He asked if there was anything that could be done. Any way to apologize, to make amends, to convince humanity that the reports did not reflect how the elder species truly felt. Ara told him the truth. Apologies would not help. Apologies would actually make things worse. Humans, she had learned, had a concept called being patronized. If the elder species apologized now, after being caught, humans would see it as insincere. They would add it to the list of insults. The only thing the galaxy could do was wait. Wait and watch as humanity transformed their collective spite into collective achievement. Wait and watch as they closed the technological gap that should have taken to cross. The delegate asked how long it would take. How long until humans caught up with the elder species? Ara pulled up her revised projections. She had updated them after the leak, factoring in the new spite levels she was observing. The numbers had changed dramatically. She told the delegate that her original estimate had been 500 years for humans to become the dominant technological force in the galaxy. Her revised estimate was 50. The delegate's silver form went completely dark. He asked if there was anything at all that could slow them down. Ara thought about it. She thought about Sarah destroying a corporation to prove her supervisor wrong. She thought about James and Maria solving impossible physics to beat each other. She thought about Tors building an engine that should not work because someone said it could not. She told the delegate there was one thing that might slow humans down. If every species in the galaxy, from this moment forward, treated humans with genuine respect and admiration, if they praised human achievements sincerely and often, if they made humans feel valued and appreciated and welcomed. The delegate's form brightened slightly with hope. That did not sound so difficult, he said. Ara shook her head. That was the problem, she explained. Humans were very good at detecting insincerity. They could tell when praise was fake. They could feel when admiration was forced. And if they sensed that the elder species were only being nice because they were afraid, that would become its own kind of insult. The galaxy had one chance, she said. They could start treating humans as genuine equals, not because of fear, but because they recognized that humans had earned respect through their achievements. This would require the elder species to actually change their attitudes, to genuinely accept that a 400-year-old civilization could teach them things. Could they do that, she asked. Could any of the elder species truly let go of their sense of superiority? The delegate did not answer. His silence was answer enough. Ara returned to her monitoring screens. The human innovation rates continued to climb. Somewhere in human space, she knew 8 billion people were working to prove the galaxy wrong. She made one final entry in her report. She noted, for the official record, that the Bureau had discovered something important about human psychology. Spite was a powerful motivator, but there was something even more powerful than individual spite. It was the spite of an entire species that had just learned the universe thought they were not good enough. The galaxy had made a mistake. The galaxy would have approximately 50 years to regret it. Ara saved her report and closed her files. There was nothing more to do but watch. And perhaps, she thought, start learning to speak to humans very, very respectfully.